to go into two types of people. We start with the investigators, the journalists, the researchers. And Tunander, you will see him being mentioned here. He is ill, but he has written his statement, so that will be read by Peter, who you know before. After Ola, who is a peace researcher, in my mind the most prolific and the best peace researcher in Norway. He dared to criticize the US in Libya. He dared to criticize NATO and the Swedish archipelago, which everybody thought were Russians, going into this seaside of Sweden, and Ola proved that they were Italians and Americans and English submarines. Of course, if you say that in Norway, you cannot keep your job. So Ola is now retired, partly against his own will, but he's still very, very prolific. After Ola, we'll have the journalist, the head of the world's journalists actually, President Dominique Pradalié, who we are very happy to have here. He comes from Paris for this meeting. After her, we'll have Stefania Maurizi, the Italian. In Sweden, she's known as the fighter for Julian Assange. She's followed WikiLeaks since its very early days. There's nothing about WikiLeaks that she does not know, and there's a lot more she knows that the Swedish government didn't want her to know. That's Maurizi. But she will not talk about Assange today. She will talk about atrocities committed by Italy against Gaza. And the third person will shift slightly. We have wanted some history here. And Arne Ruth is maybe the Nordic #1 knowledgeable on Hannah Arendt. And he's going to tell us what Hannah Arendt saw already in the 1930s and 40s, where she looked into the embryo, the starting of Zionism in Europe in many ways. So I'll leave them, and Peter is here to read the text from a peace researcher, I call it peace researcher, Tunander. Hello again. Ulla apologizes for not being able to be here today, and both Ulla and I apologize that we were not able to find a better substitute. So I'll read his article here, Follow the Pipeline, or how the US let the pipeline map and the politics come out right. In 1992, after the fall of the Soviet Union, the United States neoconservative elite, with Assistant Secretary of Defense Paul Wolfowitz and later U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations Zalmay Khalilzad, drafted a defense planning guidance for Defense Secretary Richard Cheney that emphasized the need to control natural resources like gas and oil in order to control other states that might emerge as a challenge to the United States in the future. The document, called the Wolfowitz Doctrine, stated United States defense strategy should, quote, prevent the re-emergence of a new rival and prevent any hostile power from dominating a region whose resources would, under consolidated control, be sufficient to generate global power. According to the document, the United States' presence in the Persian Gulf is vital to control the oil flow to the European Union, China, India, and Japan, which would prevent the latter entities from developing into rival powers to the United States. Their development may not immediately bother the United States, but in the long term, they may grow into powers which would then challenge U.S. authority. A U.S. presence in the Gulf area, in Iraq, Iran, Kuwait, or Saudi Arabia, as well as in the Caspian Sea basin, the Caucasus, and Central Asia, was considered a primary U.S. goal to deny other powers, Russia, China, Japan, India, and Europe, from being able to challenge the United States as the only superpower in a not-too-distant future. The United States neoconservative elite wanted the United States to control the flow of oil to potential rivals to, quote, deny them the ability to generate global power, as was stated in a 1992 document. Zbigniew Brzezinski wrote in 1997, "The Central Asian region and the Caspian Sea basin are known to contain reserves of natural gas and oil that dwarf those of Kuwait, the Gulf of Mexico, or the North Sea. It is imperative that no Eurasian challenger emerges capable of dominating Eurasia and thus also challenging America." The United States was not interested in controlling gas and oil for United States consumption. One wanted to control the flow of oil and gas to potential rivals. President Clinton's policy was to let these oil-rich countries in Central Asia and Caucasus lean towards the West and not towards Russia. Clinton supported multiple pipelines that did not benefit Russia, China, or Iran, and the only alternatives left were the Turkmenistan-Afghan-Pakistan route, the Caucasus-Turkey route, and the Black Sea-Balkan route. Bill Clinton's Secretary of Energy, Bill Richardson, told the New York Times in 1998 that Caspian oil is about America's energy security. And he continued, quote, "We are trying to move these newly independent countries towards the West. We would like to see them reliant on Western commercial and political interests rather than going another way. We've made a substantial political investment in the Caspian, and it's very important to us that both the pipeline map and the politics come out right," unquote. The Afghan-born Zalmay Khalilzad, who had drafted the 1992 Defense Planning Guidance, became a Unocal Corporation consultant, and he tried to convince the Clinton administration to support the gas line from Turkmenistan over Afghanistan to Pakistan. Unocal, together with the Pakistani ISI, supported the Taliban in this military operation for taking over Afghanistan. U.S. sources supported Taliban with several $100 million, but the negotiations with the Taliban on the pipeline collapsed. In 2009, Syria's Bashar Assad rejected the plans for the Qatar-Turkey pipeline while accepting the Iranian Islamic pipeline. Shortly afterwards, the CIA began funding operation groups in Syria to both, quote, both, quote, the pipeline map and the politics would come out right. Former French Foreign Minister Roland Dumas said that the British had invited him to participate also in 2009. Qatar invested $3 billion in building an insurgency in Syria dominated by Islamic jihadist groups linked to Al-Qaeda, which became Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. They worked closely with the British and the Americans and with Qatar and Turkey, and in December 2024, they were able to replace the Assad government. In 2016, Robert Kennedy Jr. wrote an article in Politico emphasizing the role of pipelines for the Syrian civil war and said, quote, "The million refugees now flooding into Europe are refugees of a pipeline war," unquote. It is a continuation of the 1949 conflict when Syria's democratically elected president, Shukri al-Quwati, pardon my pronunciation, hesitated to approve the U.S. Trans-Arabian pipeline. The CIA immediately intervened and replaced al-Quwati with their own man. When Richardson says that it's most important to us that both the pipeline map and politics come out right, this means that states should rely on the United States and that pipelines should in no way end up for any collaboration with the enemy. When West Germany in 1981 opened up for the building of a gas pipeline from the Soviet Union to West Germany, this was considered totally unacceptable by President Ronald Reagan's Secretary of Defense, Caspar Weinberger, his CIA Director, Bill Casey, and by the National Security Advisor, Dick Allen. They were willing to use all means to stop the pipeline, while the Europeans supported it. To the Germans and the Europeans, the pipeline was good business, and it opened up for a collaboration between former enemies, which would make it possible to create mutual dependency and mutual trust in order to end the Cold War. But if the Soviet Union or Russia no longer was the enemy, Europeans would not have to rely on U.S. military superiority. The U.S. military strength would no longer be possible to translate into political power. The United States would, in other words, be reduced to a regular economic power and would no longer be perceived as a European hegemon. In order to keep the United States as a hegemon, the United States had to deny the European their Russian pipelines. Their collaboration with the Russians became that would, because that would normalize not just Russia, but also, their collaboration with the Russians, because that would normalize not just Russia, but also the United States. The United States policy from at least 2014 was to cut off the Nord Stream pipeline. In 2016, they started massive LNG production to prepare for Germany's replacement of Russian gas. National Security Advisor John Bolton, who served from 2018 to 2019, said that, quote, we should have cut it off in the Trump administration, unquote. From 2021 to 2022, the necessity to cut off the pipeline became official U.S. policy. The United States policy was still to prevent the re-emergence of a new rival and to control the flow of gas and oil into the EU, China, India, and Japan. This to prevent any of these entities from developing into rival powers to the United States. The United States tries to deny not just Russia or China to emerge as rival powers, but also Europe. Thank you very much.
Just a reminder that all this will be recorded and distributed on Lay Down Your Arms and on the FOR homepage later. Also the written text of the proposal. So, Dominique.
Good afternoon, everybody. Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Gaza is a turning point for our hearts, for our brains, for our future. Destroyed Gaza, threats on all Palestine are threats against the whole world, against humanity. Global solidarity is a founding principle of the International Federation of Journalists and its enduring goal about almost now 100 years of development and very active life. However, more than 3/4 of a century after the end of the most terrible, devastating planetary conflicts on the 5 continents, the fundamental freedoms very dearly acquired are being called into question, and that which allows the proper exercise of others the freedom to inform and to be informed. The International Federation of Journalists, which represents about 600,000 journalists and media workers in more than 140 countries, recorded a terrible year in 2023, with 123 journalists killed and almost total impunity for the murderers. It is in Gaza, which has a terrible privilege of being overrepresented. Gaza, where all the conditions are met for a real genocide to be on, has for more than a year recorded massacre. To date, 137 sisters and brothers have been killed by the Israeli army. A very large majority were deliberately targeted. Gaza access to which international media is still prohibited by the occupying army. Gaza, where Palestinian journalists continue this daily fare of Gaza, where Palestinian journalists go on with continuing to inform the whole world with seriousness and great courage. Gaza, where the International Federation of Journalists has been present since the beginning, thanks to its affiliate, the Palestinian Journalist Syndicate, PJS, whom I salute here. With respect, Gaza, towards which a global solidarity of journalists is being exercised with some initial successes. Massive and countless demonstrations occurred in support of the Palestinian people and journalists. The first stage of international recognition was when, at the suggestion of IFJ, a multi-pluralist jury brought together by UNESCO awarded its famous annual Guillermo Cano Prize for press freedom to Palestinian journalists for their courage, self-sacrifice, and quality of work accomplished. This award was presented on May 2, 2024 in Santiago, Chile to Nasser Abubakr, President of the PJS, Vice President of the IFJ, representing Palestinian journalists. Many other prizes have been given to Palestinian journalists in France and other countries. The last 5th of November, France awarded the Anna Politkovskaya Prize to Arman Saldin Prize for Journalists, to Israeli journalist Yuval Abraham and Palestinian Basil Adra, two of the directors of No Other Land, or How Wrap Yourself in a Commitment, I quote, to the defense of press freedom, while continuing to tolerate its annihilation in Gaza. These sisters and brothers are examples for journalists on 5 continents. We are so proud of them, so proud of civilians in Gaza, so proud of civilians in all Palestine, so proud of civilians and journalists everywhere. Thank you for coming. A second stage of international aid took place with the creation in Gaza of 3 aid and support centers for journalists. They are still working now, and they give them shelter, energy, and material needs. For more than 1 hour, last November 16th, from Ramallah, we were able to talk to them via Zoom. It was terrible for us because there were 100 with them, many women, 100 telling how it was difficult and how they would go on until the end to testimonial for the whole world what was going on. It was terrible because there were only 82 kilometers in between us and them. 82 kilometers. 82 kilometers is nothing. It is nothing. A first stage is more legal since it involves organizing and filling the complete files with the International Criminal Court in The Hague, as we have already done so that truth and justice are done in the case of the assassination of Shirin Abu Akleh in May, 11th May 2022 in Jenin, and a few other Palestinian colleagues from the West Bank. Because we do not forget the enormous difficulty that the Palestinian and journalists encounter because of the Israeli colonizer in the occupied territories. A colonizer who tries to prevent any testimony of his crime and misdeeds. Not forgotten to mention the countless diplomatic and political intervention and efforts However, the Israeli government tramples on conventions, treaties, and international commitments. Gaza is a sign of terrible breakdown, as we heard this morning, of the rule of order, international rule of order. Gaza is terribly showing us how feeble we can be at times, not to be able to support these treaties and international organizations. This is a terrible break, and we must act now. As much as media are concerned, in France, for instance, because I know better than other countries, there has been unbalanced information given to people in the main medias. Lots of media did their job properly, but the main media used words which were elements from Israeli government or Israeli army without telling it. Words for me it's essential. For instance, I could hear Israelis were assassinated. It's terrible. Palestinians were found dead. I don't know what happened. Maybe Mars planet fell on them. I don't know. I am nearly to smile with you, but all these words each day by day, and there were so many people killed in a bombing in a hospital, according to Palestinian sources. There were so many things around, and there were no Israeli sources, no army sources. So we denounced it in France and everywhere, saying we have got an ethical text, we've got two French texts and a Mondial IFG text as a guideline for journalists to do properly their job. And we kept on saying, everyone should follow this text. And we can't do more. We are just an organization. We don't do more than that. And now, what's going on now? In 2006, there was a Security Council resolution voted, numbers 1738, for security of journalists. I could say a few parts of it, recognizing that the contribution of the issue of protection of journalists in armed conflict by the Security Council is based on the urgency and the importance of the issue, and recognizing the valuable role that the Secretary General can play in providing more information on this issue. Condemns international attack against journalists, media professionals, and associate personnel as such in situation of armed conflicts, and calls upon all parties to put an end to such practices. Recalls in the regard, and so on. There are two fantastic, good pages. Nothing happened. In 2022 in Vienna, Austria, the UN made a survey about their beautiful plan, 10-year security for security of journalists, 2012-2022. It was terribly sad because at the same time UNESCO was giving figures. More than 1,000 journalists had been killed during that plan, beautiful plan. You can read it, it's perfect. No control, nothing concrete. Impunity, quasi-total. That's why now we must go further, and if we want to have a vital press and press freedom, IFG wants that the General Assembly of the United Nations adopt an international convention to protect journalists and help them to do their job. It's in 5 languages. You can find it anywhere on ifg.org. You can find it. Now, what's different with what I said before? First, there is a permanent survey about what's going on with journalists being threatened, being injured, being put into jail, being killed. Permanent international survey. Second, there is an obligation for all countries to give each year what they have been doing for press freedom. And third, and it will lead to something larger maybe at another moment of this afternoon, an international independent company could go in each and every country where a journalist has been killed to make investigation when the country is not able to do it by itself for different reasons, and find the killers and their commanditaire sponsors. Find the killers, because sometimes we find the killer, never the sponsors, and put them into justice. That's the three important part, concrete. And each and every government, and I ask you to do the same with your Norwegian government, should publicly say they will support it, so it can be adopted. And it could be rather quick if we all try to do it. If we don't get that, within a few years, there won't be any journalists to tell what's going on. Because we are hunted everywhere. There is a real war in all countries against journalism, against journalists. More than 500 are put into jail right now. I don't know whether they will be out. Second, there are laws against journalists, especially about fake news, which enable some countries, so many, I can't all tell them, to go to journalists, to put them into jail saying you have been writing fake news, because the government doesn't like what they wrote, what they said. So if we don't make a step further, within a few years there won't be any journalists. We are not heroes, you know. We do our best, but we don't wake up in the morning saying I'll be a hero today. It's not possible. So please help the journalists to live and to work for you, for us, for everybody. And now I go back to the main topic. War must stop. Impunity must stop. Palestine must live. Thank you.
So from Italy, Stefania Maurizi, you know what mafia is. So we'll get a new version of mafia.
Thank you. Let's start with, okay. So thank you for this invitation. Thanks to John, thanks to Deepa, thanks to you for being here. So I'm an investigative journalist. I'm not a politician or a leader. I have investigative skills, and I think there is nothing more urgent than investigating the role of our countries, of Western countries and all countries in this genocide. Last month, I published this investigation in my newspaper, the major Italian daily newspaper, the only one not owned, only major daily newspaper in Italy not owned by powerful oligarchs with their powerful economic interests. And this is about the complicity, the role of Italy in the Israel genocide. There are different levels, of course. So let me explain you. So, my investigation, for example, allowed revealing the support that Leonardo, which is Italy's biggest, largest weapons manufacturer, number 13th in the top 100 top military manufacturers in the world, providing remote technical assistance, repair, spare parts supply for Israel fleet of M346 aircraft. Even in 2025, when the extent of Israel genocide is under our eyes, you know? Leonardo, as I said, is the largest weapons manufacturer, and Italy's Ministry of Economy controls 30%. According to the Stockholm International Peace Research, Leonardo is number 13 in this class. These M346 aircraft are manufactured by Leonardo, and what they allow advanced military training for Israeli pilots. Now you can tell me, well, training can be about everything. Sure, of course, but once they got this advanced military training, they will use their skills on the battlefield. I mean, let's not hide behind the finger. It is a matter of fact. Once you have learned, you have acquired this advanced military skilling, you will use them on the battlefield. Here is M346 aircraft manufactured by Leonardo. So when I asked Leonardo, how much is worth your program for 2025, they refused to reply. And they held behind the finger. They said, this contract goes back to 2012. Of course it goes back to 2012. But now, since 2023, we have a genocide. So something has changed. You have heard probably Meloni, our government, saying, Italy stopped any weapons transfer to Israel. Any new weapons transfer to Israel. Well, this is maybe true for the new export license, but it's definitely not true for the old ones. For the old ones, like this contract with Israel, they are still in place. They are still providing these weapons to Israel, no matter whether the genocide is undeniable. As the General Coordinator of Progressive International, you probably know this international organization, told to my newspaper, the fact that the Italian arms giant Leonardo has confirmed his collaboration with Israel, even after the extent of Israel's war crimes became fully documented, gives a measure of Italy's complicity with Israeli war crimes. This is undeniable. And I would like to have many investigative journalists investigating this from Greece, from Germany. It is our duty. I mean, our Palestinian colleagues are dying under the bomb. And what do? We can contribute to stop this. We have the duty to expose this. We are covering silly things as all this happened. Let's investigate. Let's expose this criminality. Let's expose this complicity. This is our duty as journalists. Like Seymour Hersh during the Vietnam War in exposing the criminality. We have the duty to do the same. We can do this safely from here. Whereas international reporters are not allowed in Gaza and our Palestinian colleagues are dying under the bomb. What do? We should do this. We should expose this level of complicity, because without Western complicity, without European complicity, US complicity, Israel could not do this, what it has done, with the same efficiency and with total impunity. It's a matter of fact. So we have the duty to expose the facts as journalists. But Italy's complicity with Israel genocide goes beyond the weapons. It has to do with the NATO military base in Italy, you know? And I became deeply aware of the role of my country, of the NATO bases in Italy, only thanks to the WikiLeaks secret documents. When I realized, gosh, I didn't know all these things about my country, why I'm a professional, I read 10 newspapers per day, why I didn't know all this. Well, of course I didn't know, because these things were secret. So you couldn't know these facts, but thanks to these documents, now we know. Let me show you what we discovered. So for example, we discovered the role of Italy in destroying Iraq. So the US diplomats in Italy were boasting about how Italy was fully complicit. We got what we asked for from Italy. Italian airfields, ports, and transport infrastructure were placed at our disposal. The deployment of the 173rd Airborne Brigade, the Rapid Intervention Force in Europe, which is headquartered in Italy, had been the largest combat airdrop since World War II. And this was done from Italy, a country which has a pacifist constitution. We have a pacifist constitution as Japan and Germany due to the Second World War. And yet, they were able to do the largest combat airdrop since World War II to destroy Iraq. And they closed, recognizing that Italy can appear frustratingly arcane and Byzantine. We are convinced that it is an excellent place to do our political military business. More clear than this, I don't think. This is what I learned thanks to the cable. So when you have this awareness of the role of the NATO bases in your country, you can investigate it. I don't know if you read Al Jazeera investigation on the role of the military flights in Israel genocide. So they basically were able to analyze 6,000. These are just the flights for collecting intelligence on Palestine and Lebanon. Just intelligence. This is just for collecting intelligence. So as soon as I read their investigation, I contacted them and said, well, I want to investigate the flights which are about Italy. I want to understand how it works. Could you please share the documentation? And they said, of course we share, because this is our public sources. So you can analyze it. And the platform is an American platform used by the NATO. So it's not something by the enemies. So go ahead. Of course, the platform is kind of flight radar. Maybe you use it to track flights. This is called AirNav. Of course, the platform does not track all military flights. Some of them are secret, so there are many, many more than those you can see. Sanad, the Al Jazeera fact-checking agency which shared the documentation with me, identified 6,000 military flights from October 7, 2023 to October 7, 2024. And Sanad concluded that those 6,000 military flights enabled a continuous air bridge for supplies to Israel. Among these flights were 1,900 military transport missions, 70% of which landed at military bases in Cyprus, Greece, and Italy, underscoring the depth of logistical support from Western nations. You know, this is the complicity. So I analyzed among the 6,000 military flights, 631 departed or arrived, landed in Italy, and I analyzed these ones. And I asked questions to the Italian Defense Ministries. They did not reply to my question. What did you get? Basically, you get these mysterious flights. 34 flights by the Shadow R1 aircraft. This is a special aircraft with special equipment to collect intelligence. When a small outlet in Britain analyzed it, declassified the UK, the Guardian never analyzed, the big British media never analyzed these flights by this Shadow R1, which is a British aircraft. But Italy has operated this aircraft as well, not just Britain. So when Declassified, the UK published some documents about this. Let me show you. Here it is. This is special aircraft for collecting intelligence. When Declassified published their articles about this aircraft, Jeremy Corbyn asked question to the British Defence Ministry. Well, our parliamentarian never asked a question to our Defence Ministry about this aircraft. Why this aircraft is going back and forth to the UK base in Cyprus, Akrotiri, which is a crucial base. There are 3 crucial bases. One is Sigonella in Sicily, the US hub in the Mediterranean Sea for the drone war. Another one is Akrotiri in Cyprus, UK Royal Air Force Base. Another one is Souda Bay in Crete, Greece, the most crucial US base for the Eastern Mediterranean operations. So, what did they do? How did they use? Who operated these flights? Britain? Italy? How did they use intelligence collected by the special aircraft? And how they use this MQ-4C Triton drones? They collect intelligence. They were going back and forth, Sigonella and Souda base, the US Souda base. How did they use it? You know? A researcher with the international organization Progressive International, Abdullah Farouk, was able, and he shared this information with me, was able to track down 13 flights, cargo flights, operated by the US transportation system, working for the Pentagon, from Sigonella to the Israel Nevatim Air Base. Cargo flights. They were certainly not supplying Israel with martinis, you know? So this is where cargo flights. So, but you know, our complicity goes beyond this. It goes beyond weapons, it goes beyond NATO base in Italy. It goes to the international law as well. For example, the Meloni government refused to vote in favor of the UN General Assembly resolution. They abstained on illegal occupation. They abstained. Meloni government, here you can see, abstention, Italy is there. Meloni government announced that they won't arrest. They will not arrest Netanyahu should he travel to Italy. Even if the European International Criminal Court requested his arrest, even if Italy basically joined the International Criminal Court from its very beginning, to an extent that the international treaty on which the International Criminal Court is based is called the Rome Statute, because it was approved in Rome. But Meloni government said they won't arrest him. But there is a class of criminals, quote, and I quote, against which the Meloni government is uncompromising. The young activists protesting about the role of Italy in the genocide, about the complicity, about the contract. These young people in their 20s protest in a completely non-violent way. They were arrested, they were sexually humiliated, the women activists they were sexually humiliated, they got criminal complaint. They got the criminal complaint, not that the war criminal Netanyahu won't be arrested, but the young activists in their 20s were arrested. Now, this tells you who we are in these days. Who we are in these days. You see the police arresting the young, non-violent people, filing criminal complaint against them, you know? So, they basically filed criminal complaint, they got police order to leave the town in which they were organizing protests. As I said, this is who we are in these days. A war criminal, we are complicit in war crimes, we refuse to arrest war criminals at the request of the International Criminal Court, but we arrest the young activists protesting against the complicity, Italy's complicity in the genocide. The International Criminal Court should investigate Italy's complicity in Israel's genocide. Thank you.
So we'll have to change, swap a little on the entries here. George Katrougalos from Greek Minister of Foreign Affairs, now the UN representative for social order and promoting that. George.
Many thanks, dear George. And many thanks to the organizers for inviting me to this important event. You know that we live moments without precedent. And I don't mean just the atrocities in Gaza. We have heard already a lot about them from people much more competent than me. I'm not speaking about what's happening at the level of international law, of international law and the system of the United Nations. We have seen Prime Minister Netanyahu speaking at the General Assembly itself, calling the United Nations the House of Darkness, a swamp of anti-Semite violence, and also the flat society Earth. We have seen Israel nominating the General Secretary of the United Nations, Gutierrez, as persona non grata. And for the first time in history, we have seen the army of a member state, Israel, attacking United Nations peacekeeping forces. Why do we have this stark reaction of Israel? It is exactly because after a long time, it seems that international law is moving towards the end of impunity. We have seen the important decision of the Supreme Judicial Court of the international system, the International Court of Justice of Hague, declaring the occupation illegal. We had then the issuance of warrants against Netanyahu and Gallant. But I'm already hearing you asking, what are you saying about the end of impunity? Have we heard the Prime Minister of Poland, Tusk, say that Netanyahu can visit Poland for the anniversary of the Auschwitz, let's say, Holocaust? Have we seen President Trump imposing sanctions to the International Court of Justice, the prosecutor, anybody involved on that? Where do you see the end of impunity? I must tell you a little about how the international law works. International law does not have organs implementing the decisions that the United Nations or other international organs take. It is the responsibility of the states to implement these decisions. This is a legal obligation. If, for instance, states continue to sell arms to Israel, they are violating their obligations under the Geneva Convention. When they are not taking the tasks they have undertaken as signatories of the Statute of Rome, the treaty that has established the International Criminal Court, they are violating their obligations under Article 25, and they are becoming accomplices of war crimes. And who can make the states fulfill these obligations? The public opinion, you. That's why we have seen the first lukewarm reaction of 79 countries, including most of the European countries and of the EU countries and the United Kingdom, objecting to the sanctions that Trump has imposed to the International Court of Justice. Is this enough? Of course not. But there, exactly, it is the other thing I must tell you about the international law. International law is not monolithic, it's not homogeneous, and it changes. Which are the two factors that change international law? Balance of forces, and balance of forces means simultaneously, at the same time, correlation of forces between countries, and we see the rise of the global south, how it has started to change the international law system. Not just now with the BRICS. International law at the beginning of the previous century, it was an apology of colonization. It was based on the distinction between civilized and non-civilized nations. It started to change with the decolonization struggles and the big revolutions, the war in Vietnam, the Cuban Revolution. Therefore, we have now the right of self-determination, which was absent in the time of the foundation of the United Nations. Even the United Nations Charter does not have an explicit reference to that. And we have, of course, shifts to recognition of social rights, rights to development, and so on. So, first factor of change of the international law, the rise of the South. And keep in mind that we have also a South in the North. I mean, 99% of our societies, those which are not part of the 1% of the super rich, have the same interests as the global South. And for this reason, there is a second factor of change, the movement of the public opinion, what we call people's diplomacy. The war in Vietnam ended, first of all, because of the heroic struggle of the Vietnamese people, of course, this is undeniable, but also because it became completely illegitimate because of the peace movement in the America and in Europe. The Apartheid history is the same. So, what I'm saying to you, it is the importance of meetings like that. Not because we are all like-minded people together and we share our opinions. Exactly because we can become a factor of change. When the ideas are becoming a material force, where they are going down to the masses. And it's exactly that all of us at the level of civil society should do. don't want to take much of your time. I found a poem of Bertolt Brecht. You know, he has fled the Nazi Germany. He came to Scandinavia. He could not come here in Oslo, but he has been everywhere else, in Stockholm, in Denmark, even in Finland. He has written a short poem called Questions and Answers. And in a very free translation of mine, it ends like that. In such a world in which lie seems eternal and injustice reigns, who can defeat tyranny? You can. Thank you very much.
From one UN reporter to another one. No time for tea, no time to sit. Francesca Albanese.
Who said that Nordic people are not warm? Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much for welcoming me so kindly. Thank you, organizers, for making it possible, and also the Norwegian organizations who took me here 2 years ago on a visit that then has become the model of engagement at the country level. Have brought me here again, and with a very packed agenda, even more packed than 2 years ago. But when I saw the agenda of this event and all the friends that I would have found here, I insisted to come and to stay as long as possible, and it's a gift to me. So I've been given the impossible mission of commenting on resurrecting international law. And it's impossible, no, it's not impossible to talk about that. It seems impossible to do that. Is it really true? In fact, my answer is no. I don't think that international law has ever been as clear as now, be so spoken and sort of much referred to by the old and the young, the rich and the less rich in the streets or in parliaments, in universities. It has been invoked so powerfully, so strongly across the globe. And yes, we have seen other movements, social movements. We have seen people rising up against injustice. But I think that while the movement needs to continue to grow, we have also seen something unprecedented. What is rising for Palestine is unprecedented, also because the kind of violence and brutality, I have seen the program, so I know that you have been talking about genocide. The fact that you are here tells me that you have been following what has been done to the Palestinians in Gaza, but in fact to the Palestinians everywhere, I would say. To the Palestinians in the West Bank, to the Palestinians around the globe who have been suffering, watching in pain and often in silence, especially in the West, because the Palestinians, like many others, who do not belong and conform to the white Christian race. Now, you know what I'm talking about. The Palestinians have been forced to play the role of the good victims. And so, to contain the rage, to be polite, to condemn Hamas, of course, they had to conform. And I've been really shocked, not only by the poor response to the genocide, that has been given by European and other Western leaders in particular. There are others as well. But we, first and foremost, have been appalling. And I say we as Europeans, because we know where the interests of the United States sit. But what do we have to do with it? Can we take this opportunity to dissociate ourselves, to disentangle ourselves from this poisonous relationship? And again, while we have seen all this rising up, we have also seen the brutality of the cracking down. Again, you're lucky for many reasons in this country, and without romanticizing or without idealizing. But the governments in this continent have done horrible things to their Palestinian communities, Jewish groups who have stood in solidarity with the Palestinians, and other ordinary citizens, anyone who couldn't stomach anymore seeing Palestinians slaughtered day in and day out, or their homes and belongings and their collective spaces turned into smithereens. And all of them have spoken the language of international law, of human rights, and still they have been betrayed by their own governments, because freedom of expression and freedom of assembly have been completely repressed. How much? I mean, I'm lucky to have had a comrade like independent expert George Katrougalos and many others, but special rapporteurs and independent experts inside the United Nations have really been a voice of reason in the past 15 months. And we have also realized that we are in a time like no other. Because in human rights, we often say in international law, we say there has been the era of standard settings, soon after the Second World War, and the human rights, the Universal Declaration was drafted, and then little by little we have had binding instruments. So the standards are there, there is no question. There has also been the year of enforcement, because little by little at the country level, each country has sort of equipped itself of mechanisms to enforce international law and human rights as a set of universal principles. In what phase are we right now, where enforcement has failed? Has not only failed the Palestinians, has failed so many of us who have been silenced, smeared, vilified, for standing in solidarity with the people of Palestine. And this is why I want to talk about the new era we are in, or we need to provoke it. I was in a conference some days ago in Copenhagen, and I was answering a question from the audience, was saying, yeah, but how do we do? And there is always this sense of defeatism, particularly in this part of the world, among my own fellows. Yeah, but who's going to make the change? You, me, everyone. I mean, this is the thing. We cannot keep on waiting that the change will come. We have to be the change. We have to ignite the change. And this is where I say, I'm not going to ask you to raise and take up arms. No, because I deeply believe in peaceful ways of engagement for change. But this is saying, let's use international law and let's use human rights. Do you think that slavery was abolished because all of a sudden the slave traders became principled? Or do you think that Apartheid South Africa was brought down by member states? Or do you think that women's rights are protected, at least on paper, because all of a sudden men realize the powerhouse we are? No. Every time human rights have been codified and every time human rights have had a space, it's because so many people had fought and died in order to improve human condition and have rules and put a restraint to brutality. Now, much of what we have conquered over the past 80 years is going. It's going away under our eyes. It's disappearing. What are we doing? Complaining while sipping our tea or our beer? We have a choice. But again, we don't have much time anymore, and I don't want to sound alarmist, but here's what we have to do. Because we are in the era of enforcement. Accountability. Accountability, but it's not just, I mean, you see the Palestinians, I often say when we talk about resistance, the Palestinians have resisted in so many ways that should teach us how to resist. If we had the time to really learn from people, including in the global south, how they resist, instead of judging all the time. But again, look at the Palestinians. They don't have legal avenues where to seek justice, and they have used the international legal system in a way that has produced a dividend in a way for all of us. Because I think that International Court of Justice advisory opinion, which states that Israel maintains an illegal occupation, an illegal presence that is to be dismantled totally and unconditionally as rapidly as possible. And by the way, there is a deadline, which is the 13th of September this year. Well, this is such an important precedent that is going to change everything. It's the most important, if it's applied, it's the most important decision that the ICJ has ever taken. And it says the occupation is unlawful, not just for incidental, occasional violations of provisions of the Geneva Convention or the law of war. No, it's illegal in its entirety. The very presence of Israel, not just the military presence, not just the settlers, even the control of natural resources. What does it mean that if Israel tomorrow dismantles the settlement and withdraw the troops, but still maintains controls over water, the fossil fuel, and the other resources that the Palestinian land has to offer, it will still be an illegal form, an illegal presence, you know. It's so radical, and the ICJ has repeated what we all knew. It's a violation of the right of self-determination for the Palestinian people. And it leads to obligations for all of us, member states, UN organizations, and private actors. So you see, now everyone who's partaking in this legality of Israel's endeavor is to be held accountable. It's not just about, in our prehistory, compared to where we are right now, in the face of the genocide that has happened, is happening, and might hit other part of the Palestinian people under occupation, mark my words. Well, we need to hold accountable not just those who trade with the settlers or in the settlements. We need to understand, and this is where I'm doing where I'm writing my next report about the private sector. It's the matrix that holds and makes possible the continuation of the occupation. So powers, governments who do not comply with international law must be held accountable, and it's starting, because in Denmark, in the Netherlands, and in the UK, thanks to joint action between Palestinian human rights organizations, local lawyers, attorneys, and local civil society, like international organizations like Oxfam, ActionAid, or Amnesty. Then there are other organizations in each country, but they are taking to court the governments. It seems fantasy, right? So many things look impossible until they become possible. And this is why, look, accountability happens in courts. But judges are also people who read your newspapers. And this is why it's so important that all of us make noise, keep on talking on Palestine, and writing about Palestine, and it seems useless to many of us keeping on protesting. But this is the only way to crack the wall of obscurantism that has been created. Yeah? Is it a polite way to tell me? No, I'm almost done, I promise. C'est sympa, merci. And so the other thing is that after the government, because for many of these crimes, there is individual liability. For genocide, you can respond for actions or omissions, for supporting genocide for actions. So we need to see there is so much complicity in the genocide of the Palestinian people. And let's unpack the big thing, the private actors. There is so much the military system, the security surveillance system. I recommend everyone to read this book, Palestine Laboratory, because if there is one thing that can explain you both the very nature of the state of Israel as a military state, as the author of this important research says, but also the reason why we Europeans cannot dissociate ourselves from it, is because we are tied to the system. We have purchased so much and we keep on needing so much from Israel in terms of surveillance system, the drones with which we surveil the Mediterranean Sea, or the programs with which we spy anyone we deem dangerous in our countries. Normally the other ethnic groups, that not the ethnic Europeans, whatever we are. And then there is the tech industry. It looks so cool, so modern, so innovative. And then in Israel you understand that the startup nation is in fact a function of the military and surveillance system. This is why we call Palestine a laboratory, because the Palestinians have been, the guinea pig in this laboratory. The people on whose life weapons and other surveillance technique were being used. Look, I didn't know anything of that. I've been getting to know the reality of the occupied Palestinian territory as I became a special rapporteur, because the thing I knew was about Palestine, of course, the history of Palestine, but I knew when I became a special rapporteur, but I knew the plight of the Palestinian refugees, by the way. Palestinians are all Nakba survivors, so just to make sure, because there are no Palestinians who have not been affected by the Nakba. But however, I've been approaching this as peeling an onion, and I had no idea that the system was so corrupt, but morally corrupt, not just economically, because again, these people have been at the mercy and at the service of a state who has thrived in its impunity, in the impunity that the international community has granted it. Forget the sense of guilt. We are incapable to feel guilt toward anything and anyone. Maybe at the individual level, yes, the states have no guilt. And in fact, they have continued to maintain a system which was colonization. At the time, colonialism was being this sort of uprooted, at least in its most brutal form. So, on top of it, there are the research centers. Look at what university. I'm not pointing the fingers at Norway. I'm saying, because this is what I recommend everyone. But look at your universities. Do the universities in Norway maintain partnership with Israeli universities? Well, chances are that they are contributing to the legality of the occupation. And again, read Maya Wind and the studies she has done exposing all Israeli universities, but also in the face of the destruction of all universities in Gaza, who, as Raji often reminds us, had one of the highest percentage of graduated people in the world. There were 11 universities, of which no one remains. Have you heard one university in Israel expressing condemnation? Of course, they shouldn't be boycotted because of that, but the ties should be suspended with Israel because of what it maintains in terms of occupation, and universities are part of it. And then, of course, pension funds, banks, supply chain, anyone who might be found contributing, partaking, aiding, and assisting or recognizing as lawful. And I put in this the UN as well, because I have to say, in the face of the disfigurement of the UN and the dismantlement of UNRWA, I really think that the UN are also responsible for their own defeat. And I don't know what kind of accountability we can have there. But again, as member states, and because of the role it plays at international level, Norway is very important. Have I forgotten anything? I don't think so. Yes, of course, my favorite. And with this, I promise I close. Double nationals. so far there is no country which doesn't have either double nationals, people with Israeli nationality who have been either living in settlements or who have been fighting in the army, or who become, I mean, even Norway can become at a point a destination of people who might have committed crimes. This is the other, last but not least, layer of accountability, so that we might offer, like the Hindra Jump Foundation. It's so simple and so brilliant what they are doing, and they need to be supported. So you, as for those of you who are part of the civil society, you are the antibody of a healthy rule of law system. If whenever, in general, I mean, whenever there is a problem that the government is not taking action on, you are the watchdog. And you should also see how to reorient resources so that are moved toward accountability. Look, the future is grim, but it can also be different. I do believe that it must be different, and let it be justice. Thank you.
Raji Sourani.
Friends, colleagues, comrades, 30 years ago or so, Oslo Accord were signed. And there was illusion raised about it. Peace brought to the region, and it's the end of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. After 30 years of that, the harvest, obvious and clear. And I believe the harvest, so sad, bad, and bloody, for simple reasons. A, there wasn't in Oslo Accords one word about occupation. It just skipped it. And second, there wasn't one word about international law, international humanitarian law, and human rights. And the slogan was, during and after Oslo, we have to compromise international law, rule of law, human rights, for the sake of peace and justice. We didn't achieve any, neither peace or justice or end of the occupation. And what had happened before October 7th, simply in Gaza, civil wars, and blockade for 17 years suffocated the life of people, socially, economically, and otherwise, turned Gaza to be an animal farm for a criminal, belligerent occupation. And the world knows that. And they know about what had happened in Gaza. Were crimes against humanity, persecution, and even they pressure ICC not to act or to react. They threatened even. in unprecedented way the most strongest states on earth. President Trump issued his presidential decree and threatened the court when we resorted to it in January 2015. What had happened in the West Bank? Jerusalem. Jerusalem ethnic cleansing for Palestinians, Christians and Muslims, Judaization. Sheikh Jarrah was the ugly example for a few weeks, and everybody forget about it. Settlements were expanding vertically, horizontally, new settlements, land confiscation, bypass road, the annexation apartheid wall. Every day, people, children, women shot like flies. Hundreds of barricades all over the West Bank, Jerusalem. A new brand of apartheid, but more bloody, more ugly, more clear than the apartheid in South Africa. I don't think there was lack of information. I don't think the people in the rest of the world didn't know. We have the most well-documented conflict in history. In the Second World War, Israel said the Pope knew about the Holocaust. And he didn't say a word. He owed us apology, public one, in writing. And they did. Can anybody say they didn't know? But they wanted us to be good victims. Shame. It's not a human even to be a good victim. The French say resistance. It's right and obligation for a free people. And we are free. On October 7th, Hamas attacked. On October 10th, the Israeli president said, Palestinians are human animals, and there is no differentiation between civilians and Hamas. We will get them all. Netanyahu said, Gaza should leave Gaza. Where to? Paradise? The sea? Or to 1948? To Sinai? Out! Gallant said, no water, no electricity, no fuel, and no food. The whole world witnessed what's going on in Gaza. Streamed live. How the Western colonial racists reacted. In simple words, they said self-defense. Israel do have the right of self-defense. Legitimizing the genocide. Giving it political and legal cover. We are not cheap blood. We are not cheap suffering. Our pain, anger, blood, the 17,000 children, 14,000 women, matters. And this is going on and on. We resorted to universal jurisdiction after we used the Israeli legal system for years and years. The Israeli legal system provided legal cover for the organized, systematic war crimes perpetrated by the State of Israel. This is the oasis of democracy in the Middle East. They legalized settlements, land confiscation, blockade on Gaza. They legitimized willful killing, torture, house demolition, name it. When we resorted to universal jurisdiction, we managed to have some success. In Switzerland, in UK, Spain, and some other countries. But soon, how these countries reacted. They made and fixed the legislation to provide more legal cover for the systematic crimes perpetrated by Israel. So it's mission impossible, almost, to trace them with universal jurisdiction. Now, we resorted to the ICC. All Palestinian political parties signed for that, including Hamas, Jihad Islamic, and others. Palestine became member. 2015, 5 years of preliminary examination, 2 years pre-trial chamber. Meanwhile, threats directly against Bensouda and the judges and their teams, and she was like real African piece of marble, showed the independence of the system and concluded with the investigation committee at the ICC. Karim Khan took over. The genocide began. We began to ask him to move. 2 years when he moved in the Ukrainian-Russian war with TGV speed, and in 43 days he installed office in Ukraine, in Kiev, with almost 55 staff members. In Palestine, he didn't move 1 millimeter. We pleaded to him. We were reporting to him live. Nothing moved. And then it was the zero choice, resorting to the ICJ. Ireland and South Africa were great, but South Africa responded very positively and they moved quickly in the ICJ, and they filed the case on 29th of December 24. 11th of January, South Africa, with all its moral authority, with all its history as people and state who fought against colonialism, against apartheid, against racism, was present there, accusing the State of Israel of the most horrendous crime. The State of Israel based on Zionism, its philosophy and existence, on the Holocaust. the genocide, they were accused of the same charge. It seems the slogan never again meant for the Israelis, for Jews, not for any other nation, especially the Palestinians. So this was extremely selective. And I think South Africa made, with its courage, with its principles, with sticking to rule of law, represented very good example for the rule of law against the rule of jungle. And it showed the entire West lesson of law, morality as well, and respecting the dignity of human beings. ICC, when we met for the first time, the prosecutor after 2 years, I told him, you have total responsibility. Many of those civilians who died as a result of genocide crime were not have this fate if you moved earlier. You are too late, and you did nothing, and you bear part of the responsibility. Accountability, it's not a luxury, it's a must. We didn't conclude that. That's the nitty-gritty conclusion of the Second World War. 85 million in Europe died. They are civilians. They have nothing to do with war. And that's what the entire philosophy of the Geneva Conventions, the Universal Declaration for Human Rights, for the Convention of Prevention of Genocide Crime, and. So it's the creme de la creme of the human experience. Accountability, it's a must. Nuremberg trial was very important, very vital, needed to have those who commit these war crimes accountable. We have the right to use that. We have the right to be protected. And we have the right to use this mean, the rule of law, the international law, to protect our people and to show moral, legal, and human superiority on the criminals who do genocide, broadcasted and streamed live at the real time to the whole world. I want to say something. The Israeli plan now, simple and clear. They tried all ways and all means in order to kick 2.4 million Gazans outside Gaza, to Sinai. And if this happened in Gaza, which is the laboratory, as the Israelis call it, then it will be very easy to accomplish that in the West Bank and Jerusalem in 1 month. On May 7th, last year, when Israel invaded Rafah, their dream was people will go south. but people willingly, they decided to go north. They didn't leave. You forget that 85% of Gaza people are refugees. And they have that trauma of Nakba. It's deep in their hearts and minds. And never will do that again. On the 18th of this month, after the ceasefire was concluded, I was talking to some friends, neighbors, about their return back to destroyed North. They said to me, Raji, we concluded one simple thing. What we did by going to South was a great mistake. We will never leave again north of Gaza on our bodies. This is the will, this is the determination, this is the spirit of those who survived 15 months genocide, day and night, 24 hours a day for the last 15 months. Never be good victims for anybody. To be a good victim, it's not inhuman even. Dignity, freedom, even justice, very costly, and we will pay for it. This is part of our humanity. We are defending rule of law, dignity of man, justice for Palestinians. Two points about Trump and his fantastic initiative. U.S. position didn't change for me. We are killed, bombed with the American bombs, smart bombs, and ammunition. We are killed by European bombs and ammunition. They are not complicit. They are partner. Word complicit is wrong. They are partners in the crime. If U.S. Europe stop 1 week providing Israel with ammunitions, they have nothing to bomb us with. We know that. So what Trump said, it's to complete the work which failed in the last 30 years before October 7th, which failed in 15 months. He just wants to accomplish this. And I'm telling you again, this is not going to work on our bodies. We are the stones of the valley. We have been there since ever, and we will continue there forever too. No power in earth. Geneva Conventions, Article 1. High contracting parties do have legal obligation. This is not, something states can choose. You are a high contracting party, you sign, you are committed, you have to ensure the de jure applicability of the convention. That means the protection of civilians. Are we protected? Are we? You are saying genocide and you are contributing to it. You are partners in this. So they have an obligation. Next month, March, there is a conference in Geneva for the high contracting parties of the Geneva Conventions. We will see what they will come with. How the world can accept and allow threats against ICC and ICJ, judges, prosecutors, and others. Is it just issue a statement? Is that really the obligation to do, or beyond? International justice system doesn't belong to Palestine or Palestinians. You have to choose rule of law or rule of jungle. What word we want? Palestine is the test case, and Gaza will never be the graveyard of the international law. We will defend that by all ways and means with the free, committed people across the globe. The advisory opinion, 19th of August, simple and clear, said the occupation illegal, period. Should be dismantled, period. States, UN bodies, civil society should contribute to that effectively in making end of the occupation. And this was taken to the UN General Assembly, and it has voting on it, and there is time frame, as Francesca said. Are you going to act accordingly? Yet, we didn't see. Are they going to move? We hope and pray, and we will do that they act and react in right and proper way. There is the association agreement between Europe and Israel. I don't know why Israel being rewarded with all what I mentioned in its ugly and dirty criminal history. Article 1 of the association agreements applies respecting human rights. But Israeli trade, 65% of it goes to Europe, tax exempted. Tax exempted. I don't know why they are part of the Erez law. I don't know why they are part of the academic cooperation, scientific cooperation. Why there is a twinning between the Israeli cities and the European cities. Why they are part of the Erasmus academic cooperation. I mean tens of things which is amazing. If you are supporting them as such, that means you admire what they are doing, they are part of you, they represent you, you care about them, you care about their people. Some say, you know, but there is civilians in Israel. I mean, why they should be punished? Your foreign ministers and parliamentarians are kicked out when they say, we want to go to Gaza. Out! No Gaza. We want to go to the West Bank. No. We won't be allowed. And here, the Israelis come and they don't even need visa. Don't you feel of dignity as politicians? You are dealt as such and you are rewarding them? I'm not asking punishing Israel. Stop giving them privileges. It's a privileges. It's not punishing the people. When Gaza was 15 months, 17 years blockaded, Nobody cared about civilians. They said because it's Hamas. They deserve it. No. That's evil. And that's wrong. And that shouldn't continue. Besides what I mentioned, I have to remind everybody that there is 3 provisional measures decision has been taken by the ICJ to allow the flow of humanitarian aid and food go to Gaza. After 1 year of that, this didn't happen. And the whole world just watching the ongoing genocide. We will continue the work we are doing, not to be good victims. And we will use all ways and means to make justice and dignity for our people. We will not stop using international law, international humanitarian law, and recognized and shared values for humanity, which is the creme de la creme of the experience. We know we are defending just fair right cause. We know we are in the right side of history. We know we are not alone, but all 3 committed people across the globe supporting our cause. They want us to give up, to lose hope in tomorrow, to lose our strategic optimism. Never ever will give up or be a good victim. We know one day we shall overcome.
Hello. I have a question to Francesca. Not an easy one, but how can we recreate UN?
The microphone.
But you see, I think that this is the problem, because we always look far, far, far away. Why would we recreate the UN? In principle, there is nothing wrong on paper other than the veto power with the Security Council, and you're not going to, I mean, you and I and all of us are not going to change it. Where we need to start being pragmatic and realistic, where we can make a change. And it's at country level. For example, recently, I don't know if you had the chance to mention the Hague group that was formed. You mentioned it, so you know what it is. Norway should be part of it. It makes no sense for me that Norway is not part of that group that starts not just signing commitments, but actually enforcing the law under pressure of their people, the streets, and civil society. The fear also facing consequences if they do, those in governments do not comply with international law, but also the weight of morality, the weight of ethical principles. So again, eventually the United Nations are made of states, and until and unless we change the way of behaving of member states, we can create as many organizations as we want. It won't work. For me, having the Trump administration behaving the way it's doing could be a blessing in disguise for many. Because as Raji was saying, as a Palestinian, and I'm sure many in the global south, he doesn't see much difference in the way, based on who is in the US, who's the most influential states in the United States. But given the recent statements of the US and given the behavior of the US and Israel, this is what I'm saying. It's time for 191 member states of the United Nations to experience another form of multilateralism that follows international law instead of violating it. Thank you very much. And I'm sorry I need to go, but it was great seeing you.
Okay, so we have a couple of questions for you. You can pose the questions to the group. Then we have a break. We have an extraordinary break because we need some time to breathe, and a cup of coffee. So anyone burning? Yes, you will. You will.
We have a question for the speakers, John.
Okay.
This is a question for Dominique. You talked about, the wonderful, brave Palestinian journalists. You also acknowledged that there is some part of the media that has not reported accurately on the genocide. And it's very interesting because obviously many of us think that the mainstream media has really fallen below the basic standards we would expect. Is there any process for sanctions by your own regulatory bodies against journalists who do not meet minimum standards of truth and accuracy? Or is that a road to censorship?
It's quite a difficult question for me. Because I can answer for France. I can't answer for 150 different countries. As for France, there are no sanctions that we could proceed with. There is a French press council, and you can appeal to it, and it will investigate and then give an advice saying they were wrong, they were right, they were half wrong, they were right on this part, they were wrong on this part, they were all wrong, they shouldn't do it, and so and so. Only advisors. For us, it's enough because they are all named and shamed, That is for France. As far as international federation is concerned, we can do the same whenever, with countries where there is a press council. I'm thinking of Canada, thinking of Sweden, was the first one in the world, 1916, and in Europe there are about 30 press councils. But they would be more effective if citizens appealed much more to them whenever there is something wrong to the ethic of journalist work. It's very important. And journalists need citizens because we work for citizens, we work for us all. If we don't get back, whether it's good or not, it's just a little bit in the air somewhere, and we need concrete, yes, you were right, no, you were wrong, and you should change.
We have one more question here.
Hello, my question is directed towards Raji, and I wondered, today we heard a lot of talks about singling Israel out, especially from an out of Palestine perspective. So we were talking a lot about Norway and other European states, and you also talked a lot about singling Israel out and privileges, and putting these together, this is often a privilege that is not afforded to Palestinians, especially when it comes to Palestinians living in the West Bank. I think it's one of the main accusations directed to the PLO and the Fatah, that they are complicit or partners of Israel. But I think, and I think a lot of people agree, that the people on site often just have no choice. So there's this big tension of wanting to resist, but also that we have to make the best out of what's on the ground. And I, as an outside person, cannot imagine what this is like. So I just wanted to ask if you can give more insights to how this big question in between what to do in the West Bank especially feels like.
I didn't understand the question. No, I didn't understand it. You can summarize it.
So my question is, how do Palestinians, especially in the West Bank, experience the tension when they want to resist Israel and also single it out and not participate with them, but being forced to do it, especially politically, in order to create change? Because Palestinians in the West Bank don't have a choice if they want to boycott or not.
No. But who said? I mean, we do have one ugly thing in the Palestinian political structure, that there is this division between Hamas and between Hamas and the Palestinian Authority. This is prolonged problem. I mean, it's for 17 years now, 18 years. And we all try to invest our best in order to have an end for that, because it's big shame. I mean, Netanyahu ruled out all options for Palestinian people and no other choice. We still, I mean, in process of bringing once and again Palestinian national unity, and we hope that this will be concluded soon. We have, yes, I mean, definitely, I mean, differences in the Palestinian political level, but basically, the Israeli target, it has no exception between Hamas, Fatah, PFLP, Jihad Islamic, or JFLP. The Palestinian by itself, by its very existence, targeted. For them, in the national unity agreement between the Netanyahu, Smotrich, and Ben Gvir government, they said there is one right of self-determination in historical Palestine. It's for Jews. For them, we don't exist. That's why they are making the genocide, the transfer, and committing all the crimes. I mean, we don't exist for them. So, I mean, talking about complicit, not complicit, part of the occupation, this is not part of the Palestinian discussion.
Thank you. We will have a forced coffee 5 minutes, okay? Go out, take a cup of coffee, bring it back, and we'll continue. We have a lot of interesting things to continue with. Okay. Or tea for that matter.
Hello, we've had a couple of questions regarding making a donation to the artist who has made all these wonderful drawings for us for posterity out in the lobby. So if anybody would like to make a donation just to the artist, you can go to the same VIPS number, which is on your phone, which is how you got the tickets to today's event. If you'd like to make a donation, just go to that same VIPS number and you can press for that donation now. Thank you very much.
So, we are going to change tempo in a way. We're going back in history to the 30s and 40s to the philosopher Hannah Arendt, who's been influential in many ways. You know her from the Jerusalem coverage of the Eichmann case to philosophy in the West, running away from Germany over to the US and back again. Arne Ruth being one of Sweden's most prolific writers in the sense that he's been with the media for ages, on radio, in Expressen where he lived 6 years, Dagens Nyheter 16 years. So Arne, on top of having this huge and long track record, is also a Hannah Arendt expert. And what could Hannah Arendt teach us on Zionism and genocide? Arne.
I will be very personal. I have a very particular background. I'm Swede. My father was a German who married my mother when she was a young girl. She became pregnant. They married, which was necessary at that point in time. And she moved to Germany. I have a brother and a sister who were born as twins in 1938. I was born in November 1953, when the war was essentially over. Everyone knew that Germany was going to win. But Hitler decided that it should be fought to the point where Germany didn't exist anymore, and he succeeded. But it was not a German war, it was a European war. And Norway was affected by it. Sweden was affected in a very different manner, because Sweden profited from the war. Sweden had an intact economy, and as of now, the Swedish economy is based on export. And Germany, of course, used the neutrality of Sweden to continue building weapons until the war was over. And Sweden continued to export, for instance, ball bearings until the autumn of 1944. Now my point about saying this is that due to the fact that I have this German background, I have also been committed to the question of anti-Semitism. Because anti-Semitism is a European habit. It is Europe which has formed anti-Semitism as a political and social attitude. Norway had a small Jewish majority, and Norway sent the most part of this small majority to extermination. Quisling was, at least in the former sense, Quisling, the ruler of Norway under the Germans. He was keen on effecting this deportation. And of course, that has influenced Norway's afterward history. Sweden didn't accept Jewish refugees until it changed attitude in relation to Denmark. Now, all of this has influenced my perspective. And it has also meant that I have been, in my life, a strong supporter of Israel. Because I couldn't think of anything else than that solution to the European anti-Semitism, the only solution was for Jews to have a safe space where they were not a minority. And of course, that was a misunderstanding. Now, Hannah Arendt, in my opinion, is the most important political philosopher of the 20th century. Partly because she is a woman. Partly because of that. She did not subdue to masculine definitions of relevance. She did something else. And that's why she confronted the most sensitive of subjects, Israel. Now, when the 7th of October happened, I sensed that I had to find other ways of finding information. So I started to tune in to Al Jazeera. My colleagues told me that Al Jazeera, who can trust them? And you know, you can't, since they don't, professional journalists can't answer Gaza, so we can't really know what is happening there. And then watching Al Jazeera, you see that it's fully professional. Not only in the sense that you can watch what is happening on a daily basis, you can check what is happening as daily genocide. You can check when food is distributed and children from the age of 3 cluster along the places where they can get food and hunt each other to get it. I could hardly survive watching this. Because even as a journalist, I have emotions. When I see things like that, I can't just sit there. If I had been a journalist, I could sort of distance myself or write something objective about it. You cannot be objective to anything but the facts. Now, we're in the aftermath of all of this. And of course, the United States is the mover. But Europe was the inventor of anti-Semitism. Europe was the inventor of colonialism. The United States took over empire building after the Second World War. And of course you could say that America itself was a result of European imperial ambitions. But still, when I listened to lecture here in the morning earlier, I sensed that in the United States you have civic action against Israel. He's a young person. Young people in the United States at the universities are risking their careers. They're acting. What is happening in European countries? I can only speak about Sweden. Absolutely nothing. And that, I think, is something we have to deal with. Now Hannah Arendt, she dealt with all of the important issues. I decided to check Hannah Arendt not only in relation to what are her most important writings and books. I checked archives. There is a Hannah Arendt Foundation in California where you can get all sorts of documents related to And then it turns out that in 1944, she took a stand in a publication named Menorah Journal. And of course, she lived in the United States since 1948. She had lost her German citizenship in 1937 and has then eventually landed in the United States. Now, she explains in a 50,000-word essay titled Zionism Reconsidered the background of the various Zionist organizations and especially the American one. And she deals with a policy declaration in 1944, which was a change from a declaration dated 2 years earlier. And I will quote him. The change is a turning point in Zionist history, for it means that the revisionist program, so long bitterly repudiated, has proved finally victorious. The new resolution goes even a step further than the Biltmore program, the earlier program of 1942, in which the Jewish minority had created minority rights to the Arab minority. This time, the Arabs were simply not mentioned in the resolution, which obviously leaves them the choice between voluntary emigration or second-class citizenship. This was a knockout blow, to my mind. And then she continues. Isn't it the right thing to form a state? Doesn't every group have national rights to form the own group's sovereignty? A commentary about Israel. Quote, nationalism is bad enough when it trusts in nothing but the rule force of the nation. A nationalism that necessarily and admittedly depends upon the force of a foreign nation is certainly worse. This is the threatened fate of Jewish nationalism and of the proposed Jewish state. Even a Jewish majority in Palestine, nay, even a transfer of all Palestine Arabs, which is openly demanded by revisionists, would not substantially change the situation in which Jews must either ask for protection from an outside power against their neighbors or effect a working agreement with their neighbors. There's hardly a problem raised by Arne in her essay in relation to the Levantine Zionist movement that has not left its important imprint on the present-day conflicts and discussions. The tensions between nationalism and socialism, the problem of citizenship, and dual allegiance concerning immigrant Jews. Now, what has this to say about today? I can't tell you everyone, I think, should learn about this. Historians should bring it to the fore. I have only my own very preliminary research as a basis for my quoting and referring this to you. Historians have to make a professional interpretation of it. But this early part of Hannah Arendt's position on Israel is, as far as I know, very little discussed. Now, in her most famous book, at least the one which is most often referred to, Eichmann in Jerusalem, a report on the banality of evil, and this very term, the banality of evil. It is relevant to every state now, because what is a national state? What is a majority-ruled national state? It is a state which has the last decision-making power on the use of violence inwards and outwards. It can start a war, and it can also define a group living in the country in a different manner than the majority. And the majority can take the decisions to force the government to act in this manner. That's exactly what happened to Jews. Now, the action now forced on Europe by the United States is very much part of this. It's the pressure that we in our countries and our governments should act according to the United States' wishes in defining who belongs and who doesn't belong. And Palestinians don't belong here or anywhere else. Anything can happen. So, her recommended remedy is to develop the ability to think, to feel, and to ponder. And this ability applies to persons like Aaron Bushnell, the 25 years old serviceman of US Air Force who set fire to himself in front of the Israeli embassy in Washington. On February 25th, 2024. Or to Israeli reservist Eliran Misra and his fellow conscientious objectors who choose to go to jail rather than participating in the process. Now, I talked to about Al Jazeera, who was appearing on a daily program. They have it every day, Inside Story. I watched Mats Gilbert appearing in this program twice, talking about Gaza, as he talked to us here. And I could hardly sit upright after that, because that passion from a professional, but who wasn't just a professional, who included in his profession that you have to act from a moral perspective. I'm a journalist. I'm not objective in being uncommitted to what happens to human beings. Thank you very much.
So it's possible to choose the good. We have now Max Blumenthal and Glenn Diesen. Glenn is super and choosing and can choose in what way you can include Max into this. Because Glenn is going to talk about the topic that he gives to compliment. He's the Norwegian expert in the relationship between Europe and Asia, the Eurasia question. And those who follow him, and there are thousands, I would say hundreds of thousands of people following him internationally. And he's a man who is not being unpunished. A lot of people want to remove him as a professor. because sometimes truth is more frightening than even the lies we often talk about. Glenn, the floor is yours, and I know that you could discuss it with the people when to and how to include Max. Max is waiting for us somewhere up there, as they used to say. No?
I think it's going to log in about 10 minutes, so I'll just do something brief and then we'll bring it on.
Wonderful.
Yeah. I know I have a headpiece, so yeah, you're going to have to be a little bit patient, and yeah, Max Blumenthal will join us very soon. In the meanwhile, I want to talk about a topic which might be a bit dry and, well, even boring, but it's quite relevant, I think, which is the demise of international law. Because there's an interesting phenomenon which has occurred over the past years, which is that international law has been gradually replaced by what we call the rules-based international order. Now, these are often treated as synonyms, so we can hear them being used over each other. People switch back and forth as if they would mean the same thing. But this is not merely an issue of semantics, it is very different concepts, and they reflect also why international law has been in decline. So just to flesh out these two different concepts, international law, as we know, established under the UN Charter after World War II, was set up during a time when there was several centers of power, and primarily the US and the Soviet Union. And in such a system, the main powers would want some constraints. That is, they're willing to have some constraint on themselves, because in return you get the reciprocity and thus predictability. So in such a system, under international law, we have sovereign equality. That is, all states should have the same sovereignty. No one should interfere in the affairs of others, just as others should interfere in your affairs. And everyone has the same restraint on military force, etc. Now, the rules-based international order is something very different, because this was born after the Cold War and after the collapse of the Soviet Union. That is, it was one center of power, and as we know from political realism, states don't tend to balance themselves. So when there's only one center of power, no one constrains it, and this also reflects what laws and rules are supposed to achieve. Why would a hegemon, and this is what the US set out to do, to create what they consider to be a hegemonic peace, at least an international system based on US global dominance. But in such a system, there's no acceptance for this principle that that the US should restrain itself, or indeed that the US should have the same sovereignty as other states. If you're going to rule an international system, then obviously you need full sovereignty, you and your partners, while the rest of the international system needs limited sovereignty. So suddenly, this is the core of why the international law versus the rules-based international order are so very different. International law is sovereign equality, while the rules-based international system is based on sovereign inequality. Now, when the international rules-based system began to develop, it was sold to the public as merely being international law plus humanitarian law. But it still begs the question, does this add or does it compete? Because I argue it created two competing sets of rules. That is, in international law, we say you can't interfere in the domestic affairs of other countries, while under the international rules-based order, we say, well, unless you're a liberal democracy, then you can promote democracy inside other countries. Or at least, as we'll learn now from USAID, you can finance their NGOs, mobilize their civil society, you can finance their media. So again, this is okay. Obviously, this will never be permitted if the Chinese would do it in the United States, but it's a one-way thing. It's sovereign inequality. In international law, we say you can't use military force except for in self-defense. In the international rules-based order, we have humanitarian interventions. So again, one side has the right to violate sovereignty. One can exempt itself from international law by claiming to act in the interest of human rights. Obviously, this is what NATO always points towards when it's bombing another country. However, it's not acceptable, obviously, if the Chinese, Russians, or any other country would, or parts of the world, especially American adversaries, would refer to human rights as a reason to bomb another country. So again, this is also where international law and the international rules-based order are very different. Then we also have secessionism. In international law, we're quite explicit. Territorial integrity and sovereignty of the state is an absolute, so we don't accept any secession without the permission of that country. However, in the international rules-based order, we accept self-determination to the extent, well, the liberal democracies, or at least the United States, approves it. This is why we end up with different situations. In Kosovo, yes, we need self-determination, so they should secede from Serbia. If it's allies such as Spain, obviously not. Crimea also doesn't matter how many people want to secede. This is still territorial integrity and sovereignty that should be picked. And with the wars from Syria to Iraq, there was always the same discussions in the United States, whether or not should balkanize the region, just split them up to different states. So again, at these instances, territorial integrity is not an absolute anymore. While, of course, we could continue looking to Taiwan here, obviously self-determination should be the leading principles. So one starts to see a tendency that this is determined very much by power, but always legitimized by liberal democracy. Because again, who gets to pick whether or not we go with international law or the rules-based international order? It tends to be, again, the hegemon who doesn't constrain itself, and it's always legitimized by acting in the interest of humanitarian law. And but nonetheless, we end up in a system where promoting democracy, humanitarian intervention, secession, all of this is legitimized by the same slogans. And I guess what's become quite unique, especially with this genocide in Gaza, is one starts to question, well, one should at least question, to what extent the Western countries have acted actually in the interest of human rights, because there's always been at least some area to hide and to make up excuses, but of course this time is very different. But still, I want to spend just a brief time to talk about how we got to this point, because as I said, it really began after the collapse of the Soviet Union, as we then had an international legal system based on mutual constraint, and we wanted to replace it with one based on sovereign inequality. So no constraint on us, but constraint on others. So Yugoslavia really became the first instance. With the attack on Yugoslavia in 1999. This was declared to be not legal, but legitimate. Now this is an interesting framing, because this is really the first time we decouple legitimacy from legality. And what makes it legitimate, and while not perhaps being legal? Well, it's the liberal democratic ideals. So we said, well, human rights, democracy, now we can invade, now we can sever that territory. And again, the main logic or the main rhetoric at the time, as we remember, was the Russians, the Chinese, these people don't understand and care about human rights, so obviously they should have a veto in the UN Security Council. And this is really the core of this rules-based international order. That is, we have legitimacy which exempts us from international law. And it's all premised on this idea that we're acting in the interest of humanity. And then we saw this develop even further. In Iraq, the United States began, and as well as NATO, by the way, began to talk about an alliance of democracies. The argument was that the United Nations, it had countries in it which didn't care that much about our liberal democratic values, and we needed an alternative source of legitimacy to act in the interest of humanity. So we had the alliance of democracies. Some spoke of the concert of democracies. Others spoke of the League of Democracies. Again, one tends to see where this is going. And it's the main principle here is a universalism. They defended by the West. So liberal democracy should be the key principle. The West is the champion of liberal democracy. Thus, we made liberal democracy indistinguishable from Western hegemony. And the main idea was one set rules for us and another one for them. And earlier on we heard talking about the garden versus the jungle. Again, this was the colonial language we had, with the garden being the civilized world, the jungle being the rural areas for the barbarians. And in the 1990s, there was an argument that we should really start to rethink the benefits of the colonial era, because this was a time, because the garden now is under attack. This is, by the way, language also the EU uses now. That the jungle is getting too big. It's really starting to grow into the garden. It's time to go out and trim the jungle a bit and protect the garden. And interesting, much of the rhetoric in the 90s obviously came from Tony Blair, and his one of his key advisor, Robert Cooper, even called for reviving liberal empire and imperialism, in which he argued that, quote, among ourselves we keep the law, but when we are operating in the jungle, we must use the law of the jungle. We need to revert to the rougher methods of an earlier era. Force, preemptive attack, deception, whatever is necessary to deal with those who still live in the 19th century world. So here in the West, we still live in the jungle, but when we enter this, we live in a garden, but when we enter the jungle, obviously the same rules should not apply, and one can do almost what one desires. And this also goes back really to the idea, for those who have read George Orwell's Animal Farm, it's at the end, when the new painting has appeared on the barn door, where it says all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. This is really the rules-based international order. This is that all states are equal, but some states are more equal than others. And this is also why I think that the international rules-based order is coming to an end, because it's not really international anymore. It's not rules-based. No one actually told anyone what the rules were. And there's no order. Obviously, this does not deliver order at all, which is why the world majority is moving strongly against this and calling for a return to international law. And the hegemon is gone, which created the incentives for this system to begin with. And furthermore, the legitimacy of the whole system has collapsed. And I think that the genocide in Gaza really is the final tombstone for this rules-based international order, in which this legitimacy is obviously gone. So, thank you.
Are we on?
Yes. It's good to see you. We can't hear you.
Can you hear me? My audio should be on.
Yeah, there we go. Thanks. Well, first of all, thank you for attending. We really appreciate your time. I really wanted to ask you first, though, about how you see, how you reflect now on what happened after October 7th, because again, when most conflicts start, we always get the same picture. This is a black and white story. We had this liberal democracy in Israel being attacked by terrorists, unprovoked, obviously, and we have stories about beheaded babies, all this. But now, of course, going 15, 16 months into this, what do we know actually happened afterwards, after 7th of October?
Well, it's a very open-ended question, what happened after, because we're 15 months on now. But one thing that happened, just to tie on to your remarks that I was listening to, is the rules-based order was exposed as a gigantic hoax. Obviously, there's a state of exception around anything that takes place inside Palestine, and we saw the mask lift in our own society with Israeli control or Zionist control over major institutions, just exposed in ways like never before. Now, one of those institutions was U.S. corporate media. U.S. corporate media functioned as the mighty Wurlitzer for Benjamin Netanyahu's office immediately after October 7th. All context was erased for the Al-Aqsa flood operation. All history was disappeared, and suddenly Israel was a collection of Holocaust victims. And we were treated to a series of deceptions which created space for Israel to be able to carry out a genocide, which, as I tried to explain in my 2013 book, Goliath, was long in the offing. Israel was a society that was primed for genocide. And the 2014 assault on the Gaza Strip was a test run, an assault I got to witness from inside Gaza. So the first deceptions, as you mentioned, were about beheaded babies rolled out on CNN with absolutely no critical detachment. The CNN reporter claimed that these reports were confirmed by the Prime Minister's office. So they were confirmed by one of the world's biggest liars. Then we heard about baby baked in an oven, baby cut out from a pregnant woman's ovaries, and on and on. Every single one of these claims was totally discredited. In fact, only one baby was killed on October 7th, 11-month-old Mila Cohen, by accident shot through a safe room door. The real objectives of October 7th were completely erased. This is what the US media does. It's what it did when Russia invaded Ukraine. We were simply told Putin wants to recreate the Soviet Union. There is no political logic behind it at all, and no context, no provocation. And here we were told Hamas simply wants to kill Jews. So Israel had all the space it needed to commit genocide, and it was also thanks to the Biden administration's the main propagator of the rhetoric of the rules-based order, Anthony Blinken, Secretary of State, that it was granted that space. On October 31st, 2023, at a very key moment, when Hamas was telling Israel through the Doha, through a line that had been established in Doha, back-channel negotiation, that it would release all hostages in exchange for Israel not invading Gaza, and they're putting forward prisoner lists already. Tony Blinken went before the Senate and was asked during his testimony, why don't you push for a ceasefire? And he said, because Hamas went into a living room in Kibbutz Be'eri and tortured a family to death, dismembering the parents, then killing the children, then they had lunch in the living room. This was a complete fabrication told by a discredited figure in Israel who was behind so many of these lies. Yossi Landau from a ultra-Orthodox quote-unquote rescue organization that was raising money off of October 7th fabrications. And Blinken said, this is why we cannot have a ceasefire, because we're dealing with monsters in Hamas, and Israel needs to be able to destroy them. So that was October 31st. Another deal was put forward in May that Hamas accepted in May 2024. And that deal was put forward by the Biden administration after the International Court of Justice had accused Israel of genocide, ordered it to stop, and ordered it not to invade Rafah, the southern area in Gaza where so many displaced Palestinians were living in tents. And so the Biden administration puts this ceasefire deal on the table, expecting Hamas to reject it so that they can kind of deflect from the ICJ decision. Hamas accepts it unexpectedly, and so Israel moves the goalposts, and the Biden administration allows Israel to blame Hamas for the talks falling apart. In July, again, the same ceasefire deal is put on the table. Hamas accepts. all terms. Israel moves the goalposts again. Netanyahu puts new terms on the table that are impossible to meet. Behind the scenes, the fanatical security minister, Itamar Ben-Gvir, is telling Netanyahu that if you don't sabotage these ceasefire negotiations, I will quit your coalition and your coalition will fall apart. Netanyahu is facing 4 corruption trials, so he needs to keep his coalition together. So he's consistently sabotaging the deals, and it looked like he had some kind of backroom agreement with Tony Blinken, where the U.S. would agree to blame the Palestinians every single time the ceasefire deal fell apart. So fast forward to today, we got a ceasefire deal after, let's say, 60,000 dead in Gaza, total destruction, over 80% of homes destroyed. And Yoav Gallant, the Israeli defense minister, who served for most of the genocide in Gaza, recently gave, this past week, an interview to Israel's Channel 12, where he declared that the deal that was on the table in July that Hamas accepted was the same exact deal that Israel just agreed to provide a cessation of the conflict. And he said thousands of lives were wasted and the hostages are still left in the Gaza Strip. They could have been out in July. So that's where we are today, just looking at completely needless death. Today, the Netzarim corridor was cleared, or I should say in the last 24 hours, the Netzarim corridor was fully abandoned by the Israeli military. The Netzarim corridor was a de facto Israeli military base in Gaza that was to have cut off the north of Gaza. It cuts clear across the Gaza Strip. It was to have cut off the north from the rest of the Gaza Strip. Israeli soldiers were basically living in there. They were having barbecues, rest and recreation, massages, and they were staging massacres from there and sniping at people in Gaza. The whole point was to prevent the population of the north of Gaza from being able to go back to their homes by having this base there. Because of the ceasefire in stage 2, they were forced to leave. The soldiers were crying. They were so unhappy to leave. Now they're gone, and people in Gaza are able to survey the ruins left behind in Netzarim. And they found, you can see this on Twitter if you actually look for it right now. Decapitated heads, fairly recently decapitated heads, arms, legs, body parts were scattered throughout this area where Israeli soldiers were having barbecues, while the U.S. administration was blocking ceasefire after ceasefire. The Israeli soldiers were dismembering human beings in Gaza for no reason at all except sheer sadism. So going back to the beginning of my remarks, who's at fault here? Of course, the U.S. administration, of course, Israel and its project of Greater Israel, besieging the Palestinian people, expelling them, as we hear from Donald Trump's remarks, but also the U.S. media provided Israel with all of the space it needed to be able to carry out this barbaric project. And we're just beginning to see the true graphic visual evidence of the horrors that Israel committed, because they have now finally left large parts of Gaza.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the media, because often this kind of war crimes can't really be committed unless you have some cover, both from the political class as well as the media. But I was curious about the ceasefire, as you brought up. To what extent do you see this as being sustainable, or will it endure? I'm thinking, obviously, Netanyahu, well, he doesn't hide, he doesn't care for it. The Israeli government could collapse if they actually uphold it. On the other hand, breaching it now will also come at a high cost. How do you see the likelihood or ability of the ceasefire to be preserved?
Well, the ceasefire can only be preserved with U.S. pressure on Israel. Israel has very little incentive for maintaining it. It was expected by all my contacts in Gaza that it would fall apart. And in the last 48 hours, 3 captives were released from Gaza. And unlike in the previous rounds, when captives were released, the female Israeli soldiers who were released, these ones appeared gaunt, not very well fed. They were not well fed because no one in the concentration camp that Israel created, called Gaza, was being well fed. But in Israeli media, the way it's being portrayed is that they were tortured, they were treated horribly, and that this is the Holocaust all over again, that Israel was created to prevent Jews from ever appearing gaunt and being held in the captivity of Gentile hands. And here we have failed. And the only way to redress this situation and to continue to perpetuate the spiritual memory of the Holocaust is to totally destroy Hamas. But what are we seeing at the same time in the Gaza Strip? We're seeing large processions, parades even, of the Al-Qassam brigades, the armed wing of Hamas. They look to be in pretty good shape. They're armed still. They're standing tall in the streets of Gaza. Secretary of State Tony Blinken, former Secretary of State Tony Blinken, former President Joe Biden both acknowledged that Hamas had replenished the ranks of its fighters by the end of the war. So Israel has failed in this objective, and yet the population sees Hamas as the new Nazis who have abused their population. And the way Jewish Israeli society digested the last 15 months is completely different from the way we did, the way those of you at this conference did. They saw the hostages and captives in Gaza as a kind of like football team. And everybody knew the names of every player on the team, and they knew the family members. Israel's a very small society. Everyone kind of knows each other through army service, or they know someone who knows someone. And their obsession with getting these people out transcended any empathy they might have had for the thousands of children who were butchered by their jets. So, I see a very high potential for these, the emotional pressure to start to push Israel back into the conflict. There's some, and the Trump administration, while it wanted this ceasefire deal as a political win for Trump, while it needs to prevent the conflict from expanding for now, because Donald Trump doesn't seem to want a war with Iran right now, there is very little they're doing to exert leverage on Israel. Donald Trump's State Department, under Marco Rubio, who is a neoconservative pet project, just authorized an $8 billion arms sales deal to Israel. The Donald Trump State Treasury Department just lifted sanctions on a small handful of violent, fanatical settlers in the West Bank, who the Biden administration had sanctioned as one of their few token acts of pressure on Israel. And that has unleashed settler violence across the West Bank on Palestinians, as well as sending a message to the Israeli military that it has a free hand to attack Palestinians in the north of the West Bank, where there has been armed resistance, and now there's a major Israeli military operation there. Then we have Lebanon. Israel has been attacking in the north of Lebanon, all around Lebanon in recent days, in order to bait and taunt Hezbollah into responding and to keep pressure on the axis of resistance, because Israel feels like it got the upper hand by the time it signed a ceasefire in Lebanon, and it wants to keep maintaining the upper hand. The Trump administration sent a very bizarre figure to Lebanon named Morgan Ortegas, who is a State Department official who's actually a convert to Judaism, a Christian Zionist convert to Judaism, to meet with Joseph Aoun, the new president of Lebanon. And it doesn't seem like things went well there, because the new Lebanese government, which the U.S. was pushing for, has allowed Shia politicians connected to Hezbollah and the Amal movement into government explicitly rejecting what the U.S. wanted. So I think Lebanon could be the first place where the ceasefire fails, and then that could spread again to Gaza. Israel feels like it wasn't able to finish its job in Yemen, and Yemen was a test run for Iran, which is obviously the ultimate objective. Israel believes, true or not, and it has sent the message to the world that it destroyed Iran's anti-aircraft systems, its S-300 batteries, during its last attack on Iran. Iran did not respond to that. We don't know what the truth is there, but it believes that it can actually now have a clear path to attacking Israel's nuclear facilities. And my understanding is that is the message that it is sending to National Security Council Director Mike Waltz, who has been a fervent advocate for striking Iran. The Vice President, J.D. Vance, is an open opponent of striking Iran. Where Donald Trump falls on this is unclear. Tucker Carlson, who's an influencer in the Trump orbit, is a very vehement opponent of attacking Iran. But I think the momentum is still there for reigniting this conflict, attacking Iran, and there are forces in the U.S. administration that want to remove all constraints on Israel. It's completely up to the U.S. administration whether this conflict reignites, because I believe Netanyahu wants to go straight for Iran with U.S. help.
Yeah, it's interesting with Iran, because this is really the dilemma. If they do not retaliate, then they're weak and they can be taken out. If they do retaliate, then they're aggressive and dangerous, and they also have to be taken out. So they do have a difficult way in responding. But you mentioned that the ceasefire, whether or not Israel will go to war with Iran, it all depends on the United States. And well, I guess everyone's familiar with Trump's recent statements about the need to clean out Palestinians from Gaza. When he asks how many, he said all of them. And also, of course, arguing that the United States should then seize ownership of Gaza. And yeah, it would be an interesting, I'm never sure if you take him literally, but this would more or less merge United States interest with that of Israel. Although I tend to doubt this can actually be done. I don't see how it could be, but it also seems to conflict with this idea of America first, given that this is very hard to convince, I guess, Americans how this would benefit their security. But what are you reading into Trump's comments about cleaning up Gaza? Is this all bluster, or how do you read his comments?
Well, it's very dangerous bluster, but it's bluster nonetheless. And it's bluster based on actual proposals that have been put before Trump, complete with AI rendered graphics showing the utopia of Gaza after its population is ethnically cleansed and it's leveled out and redeveloped by retrograde Arab monarchies like the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia. There's someone named Joseph Peltzman, who is a professor at George Washington University's Elliott School, which, for those of you who don't know, is located right across the street from the State Department in Washington. It's a training ground for State Department apparatchiks. And Peltzman is actually a professor there who put forward a Gaza, quote-unquote, relocation plan for Donald Trump last July when Gaza was substantially destroyed. And the Trump team accepted his proposal and said, this is very interesting, we'll look into it. You know, you're thinking outside the box. And what Peltzman said in this proposal is you have to destroy all of Gaza and restart from scratch. So it's almost identical to the language that Donald Trump kind of regurgitated out in cretinous fashion in his press conference with Benjamin Netanyahu. There are other plans Netanyahu has uploaded to his website and PowerPoint presentations that pretty much call for the same thing. One of them is called Gaza 2035. I discussed it on our Gray Zone live stream, I think yesterday. Kind of lose track of when I do these live streams. But what Donald Trump did was he sort of reviewed these plans. Donald Trump's mind is not the most acute. and then he tries to market them in a really crude way, and it sounded like ethnic cleansing, and because it was. Israel is never going to allow a portion of the population of Gaza out and then allow them back in. Why? Because it contradicts the objectives of Zionism. Zionism requires that Israel outbreed the Palestinian indigenous Muslim and Christian population in order to maintain a Jewish state. If it fails to do that and fails to maintain a superior number of Jews over non-Jews between the river and the sea, well, it just becomes officially an apartheid state. It is. It already is. But the whole point of Gaza was to create a human warehouse for the surplus population that could not come, that were all refugees from what is now Israel, that could not come back to Israel, because then you'd have a very small minority population ruling over non-Jews in its midst while declaring itself a Jewish state. So it can no longer be Jewish and democratic if that population was living among them. So they have to live in a warehouse, a concentration camp, and then they have to disengage from it and declare that they have no responsibility for that population. That's what Israel did in 2005, 2006 with the disengagement. The Geneva Conventions no longer apply. They're not occupying them because they're not physically there. Of course, they're maintaining total control over Gaza through panopticon and more sophisticated means, drones and walls and so on. The point of that is setting the stage at a later date for pushing that population onto the Arab world, onto Egypt specifically, but letting them out anywhere. And now Israel has the perfect opportunity to start to push that surplus population out in order to secure its Jewish demographic majority. And Joseph Peltzman, who appears to be himself a Jewish Zionist who's embedded in academia, doesn't face the same consequences that pro-Palestine professors face when they blurt out free Palestine or question what Israel did on October 7th and they all get fired. He's putting forward this plan that seems like the perfect plan, and Donald Trump, he understands on which side his bread is buttered. Donald Trump was funded by Elon Musk, we all know that, $185 million to fund Donald Trump's ground game in the 2024 campaign. But his second largest funder was Miriam Adelson, the widow of the late Zionist American warlord Sheldon Adelson. Miriam Adelson is completely committed to the project of Greater Israel. She's basically an Israeli intelligence asset. She also funded the career of Benjamin Netanyahu. And she was seated during Trump's inauguration directly behind Donald Trump. No member of Congress got a seat that good. Most of the cabinet members were not treated to such a VIP seat. So Miriam Adelson's importance is seminal, and Trump understands what he has to say here. So he basically delivered Israel's fantasy to them, at least rhetorically, and it was bluster, because the population of Gaza will not leave. They will fight to stay in their homes. We saw the kind of courage and steadfastness they displayed in northern Gaza when they were under a starvation siege for the past several months. The doctor at Kamal Adwan Hospital, Hussam Abu Sofia, who stayed with his patients and refused orders to evacuate the hospital until he was arrested and taken to a torture camp by Israel. That's the mentality of the people of Gaza, because they understand the moment they leave their homes, Palestine disappears. Their identity as a people disappears, and the genocide is complete. And, as I mentioned before, Hamas's armed wing is still active. So it's bluster, but what Trump has done is he has legitimized this kind of bluster, and now you're seeing, for example, the New York Times declare that Trump was putting forward an out-of-the-box idea that breaks with conventions in how to resolve the conflict. We're seeing Dennis Ross, he's someone who oversaw the so-called peace process and negotiations under the Clinton administration, and had a role in the Obama administration. He said, well, all these Arab states are criticizing Trump's plan, But do they have a better idea? Murdoch media in Australia and the UK hyped up Trump's plan, as some kind of bold initiative. So we can see now with the way that Trump operates is he'll say something that seems to be crazy, but it shifts the parameters in the Overton window and makes it seem more normal over time. So he's normalizing ethnic cleansing. And just one final point, Donald Trump's movement is called America, it operates under the motto of America First, make America great again. But it's very clear here that Donald Trump is being subverted by a foreign force in Israel and its Greater Israel Lobby and Zionist movement inside the United States, and that he was actually initially willing to commit U.S. troops to, in his words, take ownership over Gaza. And so it raises some questions for his base about what America First really means, what American interests truly are, whether they're actually aligned with Israel, and the contradictions are beginning to sharpen for a lot of the more informed members of Donald Trump's movement, and they're starting to question if they might have been scammed, and this will be an interesting trend to watch in the next 4 years.
Well, you mentioned that this plan of sending them to other countries was probably not very well informed. And obviously the Palestinians would very much resist this. They suggested, why would they want to go back, as if they were pretty much already agreeing with him that they should all be ethnically cleansed. But in terms of sending to other countries, there's some challenges there. I guess it's Egypt and Jordan, but what happens to these countries within the countries? They're just not that this will necessarily or actually happen, but just the threat of sending or ethnically cleansing Palestine and sending all these people to Jordan and Egypt. Not only just these two countries, but even Saudi Arabia, where Trump suggesting that he already got the green light from the Saudis. This could be true. I would probably doubt it, but nonetheless, among the public, this can't be a very popular statement. Something that would make them very happy with their authorities.
No, this is from the perspective of the Sunni Arab states. It's the equivalent of threatening them with a bombing campaign. Prince Turki al-Faisal, who is the longtime intelligence chief of Saudi Arabia, a very close ally of the CIA, appeared on Christiane Amanpour's program on PBS in the US. I think it was PBS, it might have been CNN, wearing a headdress, wearing a Palestinian kufiya as his headdress, basically sending a signal to Trump of total defiance. King Abdullah in Jordan, who is basically a British implant in the region, Hashemite, who rules over a large population of Palestinian refugees, leaked to the media that he's preparing military action against Israel if Palestinians are ethnically cleansed and pushed into Jordan. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, another kind of Western-backed, effectively Western-backed stooge, totally dependent on the West to rule, on the Camp David Accords, on U.S. aid for his military, at the head of a de facto military junta in Egypt, has declared total opposition and rejection of Trump's plan. The Egyptian people, the average Egyptian, is very strongly supportive of the Palestinian struggle, but the Egyptian elite is deeply anti-Palestinian and sees Palestinians as a destabilizing force. Sisi is deeply concerned about another Muslim Brotherhood insurgency or uprising in his country, and sees Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood as at least ideological cousins. Jordan saw destabilizing protests in Amman throughout the war that I think frightened King Abdullah. And we also should consider the situation in Lebanon. Palestinian refugees there were actually stripped of their employment, of the ability to gain employment in something like 75 professions by Rafiq Hariri, the late Sunni pro-Western leader of the Future Party. Back in 2005, Palestinian refugees in Lebanon are treated horribly by Lebanese society. The broader Lebanese society, with all of its sectarian divisions, is very unstable. And so adding more Palestinian refugees into the region just creates a tinderbox. So the Arab leaders, as submissive as they are to Western leadership, are just dead set against this. And I don't think Donald Trump understands that, as he just accepts the Zionist logic and the Zionist proposal for every problem. Then you have Europe. I mean, Europe's moving to the right. One of the reasons is it was part of the thesis for my last book, The Management of Savagery, on why Europe was moving to the right, was Syria. That the West had funded a dirty war and oversaw a dirty war in Syria for 10 years, created one of the largest migration outflows since World War II. Germany accepted 1 million Syrian refugees. All these other countries were concerned that they would have Syrian refugees in their midst. A majority of Brexit voters listed immigration or the migrant crisis as one of the reasons they voted for Brexit. And now we're starting to see the effect with the AfD in Germany rising. All of these populist right-wing movements rising. They're not going to accept Palestinian refugees the way that they accepted, the way the EU accepted Syrian refugees. So where do they go? They go to their homes. Why can't we just affirm that they should go to their homes? And then what about the Israeli population, the Jewish Israeli population that is still displaced? Something like 50,000 Jewish Israelis are refusing to go back home to the north of Israel because their homes many of them are destroyed, and they're afraid of the reignited conflict with Hezbollah. Where would they go? I don't know. Since Donald Trump has legitimized all of this talk about ethnically cleansing Palestinians and transfer and relocation, why not send that population for a period of time until their homes are rebuilt to Germany, which authored the Holocaust and got off cheap. Why doesn't Germany take on this problem that it helped create? It got off cheap with Zionism and displaced its quote-unquote Jewish problem onto the backs of Palestinians who had nothing to do with the Holocaust. So these are questions that now can be asked thanks to the cretinous bluster of Donald Trump.
Thank you, Max. By the way, I just have one last brief question. I know it's not popular to try to look into our crystal balls and predict the future, but given that there's a lot of possible or positive directions which are being blocked, how do you see this conflict playing out in the time to come? Do you have any expectations?
Well, I think I addressed that after the second question. And I don't like to look into a crystal ball, but I'm really concerned about what's happening right now in Washington and the agenda of National Security Council Director Mike Waltz vis-a-vis Iran. And I think the ceasefire is essentially a pause in a protracted conflict that was put on overdrive by the Al-Aqsa flood operation. What Yahya Sinwar did by authorizing or carrying out that operation was just accelerate the forces of history. And so we're living through that historical period right now, and Israel would like to reshape the region according to its own designs, but there are still various resistance forces that have the power to push back. And the strongest force is Iran. So it has its eyes set on an attack on Iran's nuclear sites this year. And once again, it's up to the U.S.
Also, yeah, good time to finish. So thank you so much to Max if he's not listening.
Writings, there are books galore. This is a fantastic hour. Thank you. We don't want to thank you.
Oh, thanks for the invitation.
I don't want all these good people to leave without having left a message. For the last 2 days, all these good people come together in the evenings and put together a statement which Ogmundur, our Icelandic journalist and statesman, will bring to you. A message that we hope that you can stand by and applaud, but let's listen to the message first. Okay.
Yes, Dr. Deepa Driver and I will read out our proposal for a statement. We have had preparatory meetings before this one today, and we have been listening very carefully to what people have been saying here today. Our feeling is that there is great unison in opinion, although there may be slight nuances, differing nuances. But if there are not serious reservations or write-out objections, the following will become the declaration from Oslo. Gaza is the site of a live-stream genocide that undermines our collective humanity. If urgent measures are not taken, it will also become the graveyard of international law. The preservation of human rights and international law are fundamental to a peaceful global community. Today we are gathered here to stand in solidarity with Palestinians and to oppose the settler colonial project in historical Palestine. We are also here to save our collective humanity through reviving our shared commitment to international law. In the name of humanity, we demand that concrete actions be taken immediately to decisively end the genocide in Gaza and the annexation of the West Bank and Jerusalem by Israel. The International Court of Justice has given a definite ruling on the illegality of the Israeli occupation of Palestine. We recognize the right of Palestinian refugees to return to their homeland. We support Palestinian self-determination. We vehemently oppose all plans of displacing the indigenous Palestinian population. We know that time and again it is the military-industrial complex and the guardians of colonialism who benefit from perpetual war and oppression. But what is particularly diabolical about the settler colonial occupation of Palestine is that many of the facilitators and enablers of this genocide of the Palestinians are the very same who created the settler colonial state of Israel by using land stolen from the Palestinians to atone for Europe's crimes during the Holocaust. It is so-called rule of law states that support and enable genocide while silencing any criticism of their complicity in this new Holocaust in Palestine.
We know that despite the courage of the Palestinian journalists who continue to risk their lives documenting the genocide, Western media coverage of the genocide has largely been lopsided and weak. We encourage all people to demand accountability from their own governments and to pressure the media to hold power to account. We urge the global community to take seriously the calls from Palestine to boycott, divest, and sanction those associated with the ongoing genocidal endeavor. Now is also time for the United Nations to shoulder responsibility for its role in the creation of Israel. The United Nations created Israel 77 years ago, but Israel to this day shamelessly violates international law and persistently ignores its duty as a UN member state. In the light of grave and systematic crimes against humanity, we urge the UN and the international community to suspend Israel's rights at the UN and in other international institutions. As long as Israel systematically disrespects its obligations under international law, it should be excluded. This is a vital deterrent and safeguards international law. The whole world is being militarized on a scale never seen before. US and NATO military bases are being overtly and covertly established all over the world without any meaningful public discourse or consent. We urge the public to wake up and actively resist this militarization, which does not secure deterrence or national security, but instead escalates global tensions and precipitates war. We salute all medical, legal, and other humanitarian organizations such as UNRWA and all professionals operating across different spheres in Palestine and beyond to alleviate the suffering of the Palestinian people. We hereby initiate a People's Tribunal to map out systematically the atrocities that have taken place in Gaza and the West Bank in the past year and a half, convict those responsible, and make them answer for their crimes.
So that was it. Thank you to the guys up there, David and Thomas. Lay down your arms. Peter, Tale, people working outside. Of course, Eva. Friends who traveled far from the West Bank, from Cairo, from New York, from Stockholm. Yeah.